Today, I want to tell you a moving story about an Apache man who spent his hard-earned reward to buy a ranch, not knowing it once belonged to a young woman whose life had been torn apart by betrayal and loss. Their meeting would change everything, turning despair into hope and strangers into something much more. If this story touches your heart, please leave a comment below. Now let us begin. The sun was sliding low. A molten coin pressed into the jagged rim of the New Mexico horizon. It still rolled off the hard-pan earth in shimmering waves, and every breath tasted faintly of dust and moss quiet. Chetan Bears kept his chestnut galloping at a steady walk, the saddle creaking in a slow rhythm. It could feel the animal's muscles work beneath him, steady and sure. Each step carrying them closer to what he hoped would be a quieter life. He wore his hair long, black as volcanic glass, tied back at the nape so it wouldn't whip into his eyes. The evening wind teased loose strands across his cheek. His shirt, rough spun cotton, the color of sun-bleached bone, was open at the neck, showing a beaded necklace with a small carved pendant that rested against his chest. A white leather belt rode low on his hips, the holster hanging easy. The worn handle of his Colt, catching the last of the sunlight. In the left breast pocket of his shirt, folded into thirds, was a single slip of paper. A deed purchased that morning at the courthouse in Dry Willow for $20 hard-earned dollars. I love it was prize money for a job most men would have turned down, hauling a wagon load of dynamite across Apache Pass without losing so much as a crate. I'd been worth every coin for this, a piece of land that was his, something solid underfoot after too many years of moving on. A mile back, the trail had crested a rise, and he'd gotten his first look at the place. A weathered two-story house of sun-faded boards sat off-center from a leaning windmill with a barn and corral slouched beside it. Beyond the lone cottonwood stood guard near what looked like an old boarded-over well. The fences leaned, some sections fallen entirely, but the bones of the place were good. It had belonged to a man named Caleb Grant, a name she had heard in passing, someone who'd lit out months ago, leaving debts and a wife behind. Folks said the woman had been real quiet lately. In Dry Willow, quiet could mean a lot of things, none of them good. As Nietzsche rode through the open gate, something near the barn caught his eye, a dark shape swaying gently in the hot breeze. His galloping flicked an ear, snorted uneasily. Nietzsche's gaze sharpened, his breath slowing. It wasn't the shape of a tarp or loose plank. It was a human form. It was out of the saddle before the galloping stopped, boots hitting the packed earth with a dull thud. The shape was a woman suspended from a rope looped over a barn beam. Her bare feet hung inches above the ground, toes dusted white from the dirt below. A broken chair lay on its side beneath her. One leg splintered clean through. Nailed to the barn post at the height of a man's eye was a rough saw board with a single word scrolled in black paint. Shan. Nietzsche's jaw sat hard. In one motion, he drew the hunting knife from his belt and stepped in close. The blade caught a flash of sun before it bit into the rope. The fibers parted with a harsh snap, and she dropped limp into his arms. She was light, too light, her auburn hair tumbling loose, brushing his forearm like silk. He lowered her onto the packed dirt, and rolled her onto her back. Her face was pale, freckles stark against skin gone ashy, lips parted without breath. The rope's bite had left angry red bands around her neck, darker bruises already swelling beneath. "Come on," he muttered, leaning over her. He tilted her head back, sealing his mouth over her, forcing air into her lungs. Then he set the heel of his palm just below her collarbone, and gave a sharp thrust. She coughed, the sound tearing out of her like barbed wire dragged over rock. Her eyes blinked open green, wide, unfocused at first, then narrowing on him. There was confusion there, then something harder. "Go," she rasped. Her voice was a scrape of gravel. "You don't want to be here," Nietzsche stayed crouched. Calm as day. "No one hangs a person on my land." And walks away. Her brow furrowed at that. She glanced toward the barn, the sign, then back to him. The wind shifted, tapping the board against the post with a hollow clack. Clack. A shiver passed through her. He rose and offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her grip surprised him, calloused, strong for someone just pulled from a rope. Once on her feet, she swayed, and he steadied her until she found her balance. Her clothes were plain but well worn. A pale cotton shirt, sleeves rolled, a brown leather vest snug over it. A green work skirt faded from sun and lust. At her hip, a revolver sat holstered on a belt that had seen years of use. "You, Evelyn Grant?" he asked, her lips tightened. "Used to be?" Nietzsche glanced toward the house. "Not anymore." She let out a short bitter laugh. "Not since Caleb sold it out from under me. Sold everything, stock, tools, even the bed. Took off with someone else." Her voice caught just once. "Left me nothing but this." He didn't ask what she meant by this. He could see it well enough. "Inside," he said, "you need water." She followed without protest. The house was dim, the air stale. Sunlight knocked through gaps in the plank walls, lighting floating motes of dust. A cold fireplace sat in the corner, unused for months. He fetched his canteen from the saddle and set it on the table. She took it in both hands, sipping slow. "Why here?" he asked, voice low. "Why that way?" She stared into the canteen's mouth. "Because it was the last thing I had and they took that too. Once you lose the last piece of yourself, there's nothing left to guard." He studied her in the slanted light. She stood straight even now, though her eyes carried a weight that would have crushed others. He'd seen it before in men staring across battlefields, in women who'd buried too much too soon. "My name's Negan Bears," he said. "This place is mine now. Bought it legal this morning." Her head came up, eyes narrowing, "So he can't take it back?" Nietzsche shook his head for once. "Not unless he wants to take it from me. And that'd be a bad idea." For the first time, a flicker of something relief maybe passed over her face. "You don't know him." "You don't need to," he said. "You stayed when he ran. That makes this your home as much as mine if you want it." Silence stretched between them, filled by the creak of the house and the wind. Somewhere out in the desert, a coyote called. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why would you care? You don't even know me." Emit her gasped steadily. "Because someone cared enough to keep me standing once. And because no one hangs a person on my land and walks away." Her shoulders eased just a little, she nodded. "All right, Nietzsche 10 bears. I stay for now." "Good," he said. "Then we'll start with food. And that gate out there, it won't keep much out." He moved to the door, glanced back at the barn. The cut rope still swung from the beam, swaying in the evening breeze. The chain board tapped the post again. A hollow sound that carried across the yard. They'd take down the rope before nightfall. They sang. They'd leave for now. Let whoever put it there see it and know they'd failed. Behind him, Evelyn stepped to the window. Auburn hair catching the last blaze of sun. Eyes on the cottonwood and the long stretch of land beyond. Nietzsche followed her gaze, and in the distance, the desert shimmered like it was holding its breath. Somewhere out there, trouble was already on its way. Night fell fast in the desert. One moment, the land was painted gold and copper. The next, it sank into a pool of indigo, shadows stretching long and deep. Nietzsche lit an oil lamp and set it on the kitchen table. The small flame pushed back the darkness just enough to reveal the cracks in the walls, the warped boards of the floor, and the thin curtains that swayed in the night breeze seeping through broken window panes. Evelyn sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. She hadn't said much since agreeing to stay. Her green eyes tracked the lamplight like she was watching for it to vanish at any second. Nietzsche didn't push her. In the West, a person's silence was sometimes the only shield they had left. "You cook?" he asked finally. A faint smile touched her lips, right, almost bitter. "When there's something to cook," he nodded toward the pantry. "Ain't much in there now. We fixed that." She glanced at him over the mug. "You talk like you're staying a while." "I am," he said simply. 20 pesos says I am. That pulled a short laugh out of her, low and rough. It was the first real sound she'd made since the barn. She set down the mug, her fingers brushing the rim, as if reluctant to let go of the warmth. "Night, why here? You could have bought land closer to town, better water, better fences." He leaned back in the chair, eyes steady on hers, because this land was cheap and far from people. eBay had enough of people thinking they own me, telling me where I can stand and where I can't. Out here, it's just the wind and the earth and what you can build with your own hands. Her gaze dropped to the table. Then you and I have that in common. The wind rattled the window just then, and a loose shutter banged against the wall. Nietzsche stood, crossed the room, and latched it. When he turned back, he caught the faint movement of Evelyn's hand toward her neck, fingertips brushing the rope bruise before she quickly lowered it again. You got folks in town? He asked. No, she said. Closest thing I had was Caleb. The name came out sharp, like a burr caught in her throat. He hasn't been a husband for a long time. Nietzsche didn't need to ask more. Men like Caleb were scattered all over the frontier, quick to take, slow to keep, and dangerous when they thought something they had thrown away belonged to them again. You should know, Evelyn said suddenly. He's not the type to let go. If he finds out you bought this place, he'll come. Nietzsche's jaw worked slow before he answered. Then we'll be ready. By morning, they were both outside. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling fire across the land. Nietzsche had the galleon hitched to a post, a saddlebag slung over one shoulder. Evelyn stood by the corral fence, hair tied back, the wind catching stray strands that glinted like copper in the light. "You're going into town?" she asked. "Need supplies?" "A safe, and a new lock for the front door." Her brows drew together. "He could come." "You could," he said, tightening the cinch strap. "But if Caleb's anywhere near town, it's better he doesn't know you're here yet." That settled the matter. She stayed, and he rode off at a steady lope, dust rising in the galleon's wake. Evelyn turned toward the barn, her eyes landing on the cut rope still hanging from the beam. She took it down, coiling it with slow, deliberate movements, then carried it to the old fire pit behind the house. She didn't light it, just set the rope there. A silent promise to herself that she would burn it when she was ready. Inside, she found a broom and began sweeping years of grit from the floors. Every sweep uncovered some new reminder of the life she'd lost. A button from one of Caleb's shirts, a child's carved toy horse she'd bought before the baby. She sat back on her heels, the wooden horse cradled in her palm. For a moment, her breath hitched, but she swallowed it down. The West didn't give much room for grief. Not if you wanted to keep standing. Nietzsche returned near midday. The galleon laden with sacks of flour, beans, coffee, and a small crate of apples. He also carried a new Colt 45 and a box of cartridges. He set them on the table without a word. "Expecting trouble?" she asked. He looked at her evenly, "Always." They spent the afternoon mending the gate, setting new boards over the broken window in the kitchen, and hauling water from the well. It was hard, back-breaking work. But when they finally stood together on the porch, as the sun dipped low, there was a different air between them. Not quite trust, but the first shadow of it. The trouble came 3 days later. It was just past dawn when Evelyn spotted a lone rider cresting the far ridge. He came fast, dust boiling up behind him, the shape of his head and coat clear even at a distance. Caleb. She knew his seat in the saddle. The way his shoulders hunched like he was always bracing for a fight. Nietzsche stepped out onto the porch beside her, a rifle resting easy in his hands. "That him?" She nodded one hand, the word catching in her throat. "Yes." The rider closed the distance, pulling up hard at the gate. Caleb's face was tanned from trail dust and whiskey, his eyes bloodshot, his mouth already twisting into a sneer. He leaned forward in the saddle, resting his forearms on the horn. "Well," he drawled. "Looks like the little wife's found herself a new protector." Nietzsche didn't move. "This land's mine now. Bought and paid for." Caleb's laugh was low and ugly. "Don't matter. Everything here was mine first, including her." Evelyn's fists clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "I'm not yours, Caleb. Not anymore." He ignored her, eyes locked on Nietzsche. "You think you can just ride in, throw some money at a judge, and take what's mine?" Nietzsche's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "That's exactly what I did. Now you are trespassing." For a moment, no one moved. The wind whispered across the yard, carrying the faint triangle of the cottonwood. Then Caleb's hand inched toward the revolver at his hip. Nietzsche's rifle came up in a smooth motion, the barrel resting steady against his shoulder. Don't, he said. Caleb froze, eyes narrowing. This ain't over. Maybe not, Nietzsche said. But it's over for today. Caleb spat in the dust, wheeled his horse, and rode off. The sound of his hooves fading into the desert. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. He'll be back. I know, Knight, she said. It turned, meeting her eyes. But so will I. For the first time in months, she believed it. That night, as they sat at the table with the lamplight flickering between them, Evelyn found herself speaking more than she had in years. She told him about the baby she'd lost, about the day Caleb left, about the cold silence that had settled over her since. Nietzsche listened without interrupting, his dark eyes steady, as if every word mattered. When she finally trailed off, he leaned forward slightly. Evelyn, out here. No one gets to decide your worth but you. Not Caleb. Not the folks in town. Yours too. She nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it settle deep. The rope had been one end. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something else. Outside the desert was quiet, but far off. In the black line of the hills, a faint glimmer moved a lantern swinging in the dark. Trouble was still out there, closing in, and neither of them had any intention of running. The lantern appeared again the next night. Evelyn spotted at first a faint bobbing light moving across the ridgeline like a will-o'-the-wisp. She had been standing at the kitchen window, drying the last tin plate from supper when it caught her eye. At first she thought it was some ranch hand from the neighboring spread, but there weren't any neighbors close enough for that. Then she saw the way it paused, moved a little, paused again like someone was watching. Nietzsche was on the porch, sharpening his skinning knife. When she told him, he stood without a word, set the knife down, and reached for the Winchester leaning against the wall. You think it's him? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Could be. Could be someone he sent. The night air was cool and dry, carrying the smell of moss quiet and dust. Nietzsche stepped down from the porch, boots silent in the sand, and moved out toward the corral for a better view. Evelyn followed him to the edge of the porch, arms wrapped tight around herself. The light vanished. Nietzsche scanned the hills for a long minute before turning back. They're testing us, seeing if we're awake. Evelyn's voice was low. And if we weren't, they'd come in closer. The following day was tense. Nietzsche kept his rifle within arm's reach, even while fixing the porch rail and hauling water. Evelyn found herself glancing toward the hills every few minutes, as if expecting the light to appear in daylight, though. By mid-afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned a deep slate gray. Wind whipping across the yard. Nietzsche used the chance to work with her inside checking locks, reinforcing the kitchen door, showing her how to handle the colt he'd bought. You ever shoot before? He asked. Evelyn took the revolver, her grip a little awkward. Once at a fair in Abilene, I hit a painted tin star. After 5 tries, this won't be a painted star, he said, adjusting her stance. But you'll get it. They spent the next hour with him, guiding her hands, explaining the weight, the sideline, the way the trigger felt just before it broke. Each shot they fired into the barrel of sand behind the barn felt like a small reclaiming of control. That night, the lantern came closer. It was raining now, a steady hiss against the roof. Nietzsche had banked the fire in the stove. And Evelyn was patching a tear in her skirt by lamplight when the dog Nietzsche had found in town, half mud, half coyote, let out a low growl. Nietzsche's eyes flicked toward the window, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides. There it was, the light weaving through the darkness now halfway down the slope. Get your gun, he said. She didn't question him. They moved together. He toward the door. She toward the side window that faced the barn. Rain slicked the porch boards as Nietzsche stepped out. Briefly at the ready. The lantern stopped. Then slowly it lifted higher, swinging in a small arc. A signal. Nietzsche raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel. You've got 10 seconds to turn around, he called into the dark. His voice was steady, carrying over the rain for a heartbeat. Nothing moved it. Then the lantern swung once more before winking out entirely. Nietzsche waited, listening for hoofbeats or footsteps, but there was nothing, just the rain and the steady breathing of the dog at his side. The next morning brought proof they weren't imagining things. Nietzsche found boot tracks in the mud near the corral. They prints deep and angled toward the barn door. He crouched, touching the edges of one with his fingertips. "Two men," he said, one heavier than the other. "Both wearing heat boots, not moccasins. They were here while we were sleeping." Evelyn's stomach turned. Why didn't the dog? They didn't get close enough to set him off. Used close enough to count doors and windows. She swallowed. "So, what do we do?" Nietzsche straightened, eyes scanning the horizon. "We get ahead of them." By noon, he had her helping haul timbers from the old shed to reinforce the barn doors and the lower windows. They set a tripwire near the corral and stacked sandbags inside the living room beneath the front window. Nietzsche explained it all in that calm, matter-of-fact way that made Evelyn feel less like a helpless bystander and more like a partner. While they worked, he told her about his own people, how his band had been scattered after the army took their land, how he'd worked cattle for ranchers who'd paid him in leftover rations and insults, and how this patch of earth was the first thing he'd owned in years. "That's why I'm not giving it up," he said. Driving a nail home with one hard swing. "Not for Caleb. Not for anyone." Evelyn met his gas. "Then I'm not leaving." Something passed between them, then wordless, but solid as the earth under their boots. The attack came sooner than either of them expected. Late the next evening, just as the last of the daylight bled from the sky, the dog growled again, this time deep and unbroken. Nietzsche was already moving before Evelyn could set down the dish she was drying. "Stay low," he told her, handing her the colt like we practiced. She slid behind the sandbags at the front window, while Nietzsche took the port. Shapes moved in the twilight, 3 of them, fanning out toward the barn and the front door. Caleb was in the middle, his silhouette unmistakable. "You sure know how to make a man feel unwelcome," Caleb called out, voice carrying on the cool air. "This land's not yours," Nietzsche replied. Caleb chuckled. "That's the thing, Apache. Do you think that matters? Out here, a man takes what he can hold." "Then come and try," Nietzsche said. The first shot cracked the air, splintering the porch rail inches from Nietzsche's leg. It dropped to one knee and returned fire. The report of the Winchester loud enough to make Evelyn's ears ring even from inside. One of Caleb's men yelped and dropped behind the trough. Evelyn's hands on the colt. She saw movement to her left, a figure creeping toward the side window. She braced, aimed like Nietzsche had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The flash lit the room and the figure outside stumbled back with a curse. Outside, rain began to fall again, hissing against the dirt. Caleb's voice rang out, angry now. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Evelyn." Her reply was steady, even over the pounding of her heart. "So are you." The fight didn't last long. Outnumbered in his own mind, Caleb finally signaled to his men, and they pulled back into the darkness. The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the rain and a distance. Nietzsche stepped inside, dripping water, the Winchester still in his hands. "You all right?" She nodded, lowering the colt. "You think I hit him?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You did fine." They barred the doors, checked the windows, and banked the fire. Outside, the storm settled in for the night. But inside there was a different kind of quiet one, laced with the knowledge that they'd held the line together. Evelyn sat at the table, hands still trembling slightly. "It's not done." "No," Nietzsche agreed. It poured them both coffee, the steam curling between them. "But neither are we." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean but raw. The smell of wet earth hung in the air, and the hills shimmered faintly under a pale morning sun. Evelyn stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee, her eyes tracing the muddy ground for any fresh tracks. There were none. The night had been quiet after Caleb retreated, but she knew better than to believe the quiet meant safety. Nietzsche was already outside, saddle on his shoulder. He moved with the steady purpose of a man who'd ridden into trouble before and lived to tell about it. "You going somewhere?" she asked. "Hasty," he said simply. "Need to see who Caleb's been drinking with." And if they are the kind to take his side? Evelyn frowned. And if they are, his eyes were hard. Then I make sure they don't come back with him. She wanted to argue to tell him he shouldn't be walking into that kind of risk. But something in his expression told her it would be like shouting at the wind. Instead, she handed him a small cloth bundle. Jerky bread and a bit of cheese. Don't go hungry just to prove you are tough. A hint of a smile crossed his face. You're learning. The ride into town took most of the morning. Nishi kept to the less used trails, avoiding open ridges where a rifle could find him. The town of Dry Creek was little more than a wide street lined with false front buildings, saloon, general store, blacksmith, and a sheriff's office that looked like it hadn't seen much law in months. He tied his horse outside the livery and walked into the saloon. The place smelled of stale beer and cigar smoke, a haze hanging under the rafters. A few cowhands glanced up at him, then looked away, the way men do when they don't want trouble, but also don't want to be seen avoiding it. Behind the bar, Tom Breer polished a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the glass itself. Morning, Nietzsche. Coffee, you're the hard stuff. Used looking for information. Tom's eyes flickered. About Caleb Turner. That got a reaction. Two men at the far table stopped their quiet conversation. One of them was missing his left ear. The other had a scar running down the side of his jaw. Hired guns by the look of them. Tom lowered his voice. He's been flashing around money he don't have, making promises he can't keep. Bought drinks for half the saloon last week. Word is he's trying to hire on some extra muscle. Nietzsche glanced at the two men in the corner. Them. Tom hesitated. They might be listening for offers. Nietzsche finished his coffee, set the coin on the bar, and walked out. Had they seen enough? Caleb wasn't going to give up. Not after the way last night went. Back at the ranch, Evelyn spent the day checking the trip wires and keeping the fire hot. The quiet pressed on her, broken only by the creak of the windmill and the occasional nicker of the horse's seises. Every so often she found herself standing at the window, scanning the horizon. Late in the afternoon, she spotted dust on the road, a rider coming fast. Her heart leapt until she recognized Nietzsche's easy seat in the saddle. He swung down and tied his horse in the shade. He's recruiting, he said without preamble. And I'd bet good money he'll come back with more than just those two from last night. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the edge of her apron. So we wait for now, Nietzsche said, but we make sure when he comes he wishes he hadn't. Jeez, they worked until sunset. Nietzsche showed her how to set snares along the north fence line where the brush offered cover. He rigged a bell and wire system inside the barn so no one could open the door without setting off a racket. They stacked more sandbags and stowed water in buckets by each entrance. When the day's work was done, they sat on the porch, watching the sky bleed from gold to purple. The first stars winked through the twilight. You've done all this before, Evelyn said quietly. Nietzsche's gaze was on the horizon. eBay defended camps from soldiers, horses from rustlers, and my own life from men who thought an Apache was worth less than the dirt under their boots. You learned to stay one step ahead. She studied him. The hard lines of his face softened by the evening light. Why are you helping me? Really? His eyes met hers. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And because you didn't run when you could have. Something in her chest tightened, but before she could speak, a sharp distant sound broke the quiet, the unmistakable crack of a rifle. They both froze. The shot hadn't been aimed at them. It was too far, but it had come from the direction of the east pasture. Nietzsche was on his feet instantly, grabbing the Winchester. Stay inside, he ordered. Evelyn ignored that. Fetching the Colt from the shelf and following him to the edge of the porch. In the fading light, she could see dust rising where the pasture fence dipped into a shallow draw. Two figures were moving, one on horseback, one on foot, dragging something behind him. Nietzsche swore under his breath. They're taking a steer. The rider spotted them and spurred his horse. The man on foot dropped the rope and ran for the cover of the draw. Nietzsche fired once, the shot kicking up dirt near the man's boots, and the thief vanished into the brush. By the time they reached the steer, it was trembling but unharmed. Nietzsche checked it over, then led it back toward the barn. "They're testing us again," he said grimly, "seeing how fast we respond." Evelyn's grip on the Colt was white-knuckled. "Then we respond faster next time." That night, neither of them slept much. Nietzsche took the first watch, sitting on the porch with the rifle across his knees. Evelyn dozed in the chair by the window, waking at every creak and rustle. Around midnight, she stepped out to bring him coffee. The moon was high, painting the land in silver. Nietzsche was staring toward the hills, every muscle tight. "There," he said softly. She followed his gaze. 3 dark shapes were moving along the ridge. Not lanterns this time, but men silhouetted against the stars. "They're closer," she whispered. Nietzsche nodded. "And more of them." They watched in silence as the shapes disappeared into the far side of the ridge. Neither spoke of what it meant. They both knew. Caleb was gathering his storm. By dawn, the decision was made. Nietzsche would ride to the old mining camp 20 millas north where a handful of men still eked out a living digging for silver in played-out veins. Some of them owed him favors from cattle drives and poker nights. If trouble was coming, he'd rather not meet it alone. Evelyn wanted to come, but he shook his head. "If they're watching, they'll see you're here alone and get bold. That's when the traps will matter." She hated it, but she understood. So she stood on the porch and watched him ride out, the dust of his trail curling into the morning air. For the rest of the day, she moved between chores and lookout. The house felt bigger without him, the silence heavier. Every creak of the windmill sounded like footsteps, every shadow in the yard like a figure crouched low. It was near sunset when she saw them 3 riders coming fast from the south. None of them was Nietzsche. Her breath caught. The lead rider wore a battered hat pulled low, but she recognized the shape of his shoulders the way he sat his horse. Caleb. The 3 riders slowed as they approached the front gate. Dust clung to their coats, their horses leered from the hard push. Caleb Turner swung down first, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. They lost weight since Evelyn last saw him, but the swagger was still there, sharpened now by bitterness. "Afternoon, Evelyn," he drawled, tipping his hat in mock politeness. "Looks like you've been entertaining guests while I've been away." Evelyn stood square in the doorway, one hand resting near the Colt at her hip. "You sold this place, Caleb. You made your choice." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A man can't sell what's rightfully his, not for good. You think a piece of paper from some county clerk means a damn thing out here? This land's mine. Always has been. It's Nietzsche's now," she said evenly. "But for fair and square." At the mention of Nietzsche's name, Caleb's jaw tightened. "The Apache," he spat. "You'd rather stand with her than your own husband?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'd rather stand with someone who keeps his word." The 2 men with Caleb shifted in their saddles, restless. They weren't here for a polite conversation. They were hard muscle, and trouble was the only payment they understood. Caleb's gaze swept the yard. "Where is he?" "Not here." That seemed to please him. He stepped closer. The leather of his coat creaking. "Then this will be easy." Evelyn's pulse thudded in her ears. The traps they'd set the trip wires, the snares were all meant for a night assault, not a broad daylight confrontation. But she'd be damned if she let Caleb walk in without resistance. "Turn around, Caleb," she said. "I'm not asking twice." For a moment, she thought he might back down. Then he lunged forward, shoving past her into the house. One of his men dismounted, the other keeping watch near the gate. Evelyn grabbed for his arm, but he twisted free, knocking over a chair as he scanned the room. "Where's the deed?" he barked. "Don't play stupid with me." She raised the Colt. "Leave, nah." Caleb froze, his eyes narrowing. Then with a sudden burst, he slapped the barrel aside and slammed her against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. "You think you can threaten me?" he hissed. "You don't have the guts to pull that trigger." Evelyn's knee came up hard, catching him in the ribs. He staggered back and she dove for the gun, but the second man was already through the door. He kicked it away, grinning as he reached for her. That's when the bell and wire rig in the barn went off loud, clanking, metallic. All 3 of them turned toward the sound. Nietzsche's voice cut through the air, low and dangerous. Step away from her. He was framed in the doorway, rifle steady, eyes like flint. Behind him, the bell still clanged, swinging from where he'd triggered it on purpose. Caleb's face twisted. You, me, Nietzsche said, taking a slow step inside. You've got two choices. Leave on your horses or leave on foot. The man by the door reached for his gun. Nietzsche's rifle barked once, the bullet splintering the wood an inch from his hand. The man froze, his bravado draining away. Caleb's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. You think you can scare me? Nietzsche's gaze didn't waver. I don't have to. They backed out into the yard. Nietzsche keeping the rifle trained. But Caleb wasn't done. At the edge of the gate, he stopped and turned, his voice carrying over the dry grass. Des ain't te over. Next time, you won't see me coming. Nietzsche's reply was quiet, but sharp as broken glass. You come again, and it'll be the last time. Caleb spat in the dirt, then swung into the saddle. The three of them rode out, dust trailing behind like smoke from a dying fire. That night, the sky was clear and cold. The stars seemed closer than usual, sharp pinpricks in the black. Eveline sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself. He won't stop, she said finally. No, Nietzsche agreed, leaning against the post. Men like him don't stop until they're made to. There was a weight in his tone that made her look up. What are you thinking? He met her eyes. I'm thinking it's time to end this. 2 days later, the end came. It was just past noon when the first shot rang out. Nietzsche barely ducked in time as the bullet tore through the railing. Caleb and 4 men were riding hard from the south. Rifles already up. Nietzsche shouted for Evelyn to get inside, then returned fire, dropping one man's head clean off his head. Bullets chewed into the porch posts, splinters flying. The fight moved fast, too fast for Evelyn to think. She loaded for Nietzsche while he covered the doors, their movements sharp, and practiced. 2 of Caleb's men fell, one clutching his leg, the other crawling toward his horse. Then Caleb made his raw. He circled wide using the corral as cover and came up behind the barn. Nietzsche spotted him just in time, but not soon enough to stop him from grabbing Evelyn as she stepped out with a bucket of water. Her scream ripped through the yard. Caleb had her by the hair, dragging her toward the hitching post. You want her, he yelled. Come get her. Nietzsche came out slow, rifle in hand, but muzzle low. Caleb's pistol was pressed under Evelyn's jaw, his face twisted in triumph. You're going to watch, Caleb said. You're going to watch while I take back what's mine. Nietzsche's voice was calm, almost too calm. You've already lost, Caleb. You just don't know it yet. Caleb laughed. They sound jagged. Lost. eBay got your woman right here. She's not mine to have, Nat said. Says her own. That's what makes you weak. Do you think people are things you can own? Caleb's eyes flickered just for a second. And in that heartbeat, Evelyn moved. She stumped hard on his instep, throwing her head back into his face. He staggered, the pistol wavering. Nietzsche's rifle cracked. The shot hit Caleb square in the shoulder, spinning him into the post. The pistol flew from his hand. Before he could recover, Nietzsche was on him, yanking him to his feet and slamming him against the wood. You come here with rope, Nietzsche said, nodding to the cold lariat hanging from Caleb's saddle. You wanted to hang me. Let's see how you like the feel of it. Eveline's eyes went wide. Nietzsche. But the yard was still, the only sound Caleb's ragged breathing. Nietzsche looped the rope over the crossbeam of the hitching post, pulling it tight around Caleb's neck. Not enough to choke, just enough to remind him how close he was. This is your last warning. Nietzsche said, leave Dry Creek tonight. You set foot on this land again. He won't miss the next shot. Caleb's face was white, his bravado gone. You're a dead man, he spat, but his voice trembled. Nietzsche shoved him toward his horse. Get out. And they watched him ride off, his good arm holding the reins awkwardly. The other 2 surviving men followed, casting weary glances back at the ranch. When they were gone, Evelyn let out a long breath. You could have killed him. Nietzsche made her gas. He wanted him to know what it felt like. Fear sticks longer than pain. She nodded slowly. Think he'll stay gone? Nietzsche looked toward the horizon where the dust was already fading. I think he'll think twice. The sun was dipping low now, the shadows long across the yard. Evelyn stepped closer, her hand brushing his. Then maybe we can finally have some peace. For the first time in days, Nietzsche allowed himself a small smile. Maybe. The days that followed were quiet, quieter than either of them expected. No riders in the distance, no gunshots echoing across the hills, just the steady rhythm of ranch work, mending fence lines, feeding stock, tending the garden. It was the kind of peace Evelyn hadn't felt in years. One evening, she stood in the corral, brushing down the mare Nietzsche had given her to ride. The air was heavy with the scent of sage and sun-warmed hay. Overhead, the sky burned orange and red. The last light spilling across the prairie like fire over gold. Nietzsche came up behind her, silent as always, until the shadow of his hat stretched beside hers. She likes you, he said, nodding toward the mare. Evelyn smiled faintly. I think she likes anyone who feeds her. He chuckled low, a sound she'd grown to crave. That helps. They walked together toward the porch, their boots crunching over the dry dirt. Evelyn glanced at him, her voice thoughtful. You could sell this place, you know. Make a good profit. Start somewhere else. Nietzsche shook his head. Land isn't just dirt. It's what you put into it. Sweat, work, days you can't get back. You sell it. You sell part of yourself. Evelyn understood that better than she wanted to admit. Jube already put more into this place than anyone has in years, she said softly. Nietzsche stopped at the porch steps, looking out over the horizon. Jube put something into it, though. Her bra furrowed. Me. You're the reason it feels alive. The words landed deep, the kind that stayed with a person. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sound of a single rider approaching from the south cut her short. Nietzsche's hand went to his rifle. Evelyn's breath caught. The memory of Caleb's last threat, still sharp in her mind. The rider slowed as he neared the gate, one hand raised. Name is Sheriff McGra, he called. Mind if I come in? Nietzsche lowered the rifle slightly, but kept his guard up. What's your business? The sheriff swung down from his horse, dusting his coat. Used passing word. Caleb Turner's dead. Evelyn blinked. Death. Found him this morning hanging from a cottonwood down near the old rail line. No sign of his men. Her stomach turned. Who? Don't know. The sheriff said, his tone unreadable. Could have been someone he crossed in Abilene. Could have been one of his own. A adjusted his hat. Figured you ought to know. Might mean your troubles are over. After the sheriff rode off, silence settled over the yard. Evelyn stared at the horizon, not sure how to feel. Nietzsche finally spoke. You don't know him, Grief. I know, she said, though her voice was quiet. It's just ending like that. It feels strange. Nietzsche's gaze was steady. Sometimes the West writes its own endings. Doesn't ask if you're ready for them. She nodded, letting the truth of that sink in that night. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters and carrying the scent of distant rain. Evelyn sat at the table mending a tear in one of Nietzsche's shirts while he cleaned his rifle by the fire. Without looking up, he said, you could leave if you wanted. Go east. Start over somewhere far from all this. She paused, needle in hand. Do you want me to? No, he said simply, but I wouldn't hold you here. She set the shirt down and met his eyes across the flickering light. This is my place now, though. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nietzsche gave a small nod, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that meant more than any grand gesture. The following weeks brought a rhythm they both fell into naturally. Evelyn planted early beans and corn in the kitchen garden. Nietzsche took to repairing the barn roof before the summer storms hit. One afternoon while they were hauling water from the well, she said, you know, most folks in town still don't trust an Apache owning land out here. Nietzsche glanced at her, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. Most folks in town didn't see you face down Caleb Turner with a cold. She laughed a real laugh that felt strange in her throat after so long. Guess we make a good pair. Guess we do. One evening in late spring they saddled the horses and rode out to the North Ridge. From there the view stretched for miles, rolling grasslands, scattered cottonwoods, the river cutting a silver line through it all. Eveline reined in beside him. Hard to believe this was almost gone from my life, she said quietly. Nietzsche studied the land. Hard to believe it ever belonged to someone who didn't care for it. She turned in the saddle to face him. Thank you for saving it, for saving me. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. You saved yourself, Eveline. He just reminded you how they sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in shades of copper and rose. On the ride back, a hawk wheeled overhead, its cry carrying on the wind. When they reached the yard, Evelyn slid down from the saddle, the stirrup leather creaking. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Nietzsche loosened the cinch on his horse. Next is just tomorrow's work. Fancies to mend, stock to tend. You mean beyond that, she said, a year from now. 5 years. He paused, then stepped closer, his voice low. 5 years from now. You see this place? You see it stronger. Fuye. You see you here. If you'll have that. Her answer came without hesitation. I will. Later, as the first stars appeared, they sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching the fireflies wink in the grass. The wind had settled, the air warm with the promise of summer. Eveline leaned her head against his shoulder. Feels like we finally have peace. Nietzsche glanced toward the dark line of the horizon. Peace doesn't last forever out here. I know, she said. But we'll take what we can while we can. In Navid. That's the way of the West. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its voice rising and falling across the open land. Eveline smiled faintly. Sounds like he's singing us to sleep. Nietzsche's arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her closer. Then let's listen. And for a long time, they did. Two people bound not by ownership but by the choice to stand together in a land that gave nothing easily and took without warning. In the end, that choice was worth more than any deed, more than any fortune. It was the kind of bond the West itself might honor if it cared to notice. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this.